So now I'd like to introduce Jamie Clark from the Carbon Trust.
Thank you, Susan. Good morning, everyone. Jamie Clark here, consultant at the Carbon Trust, and welcome this morning to a webinar on moving to an electric vehicle fleet. This webinar is being presented by the Green Business Fund, which is a scheme that we run here at the Carbon Trust aimed at supporting energy efficiency improvements for SMEs. So just quickly, a little bit about the Carbon Trust for some of you that may not know. Carbon Trust is a mission-led organisation. We're founded by the UK government, but now are independent, and our mission is to accelerate the move to a sustainable, low-carbon economy. Obviously, we see electric vehicles as being very topical and a key part of that. So the purpose of the webinar today is to talk a little bit about what the advantages of electric vehicles are, why they are growing so much currently, and why businesses should consider switching to electric vehicles if it suits them as well. Just a little bit about myself as well. As I said, I'm a consultant here at the Carbon Trust, and I also oversee our ESOS fleet audits. So get to speak to a lot of businesses and really kind of understand a lot of the challenges they're facing when it comes to managing their fleets. And we get a lot of questions around what are the advantages of switching to electric vehicles? Should we do this? What's the current charging situation? So hopefully I can answer some of those questions here. I would also like to highlight that through the Green Business Fund, we've also produced a publication on electric and smart vehicles. This is available free of charge, so I'd encourage you to go ahead and download this as well if you're interested in learning more about electric vehicles for your business. The link to this is provided in some of the final slides, so when the slides are shared afterwards, you'll be able to access it there. Alternatively, you can just Google Carbon Trust Electric and Smart Vehicles Guide, and you should be able to find it as well. So in terms of the agenda, what we're going to cover off this morning, quickly, I just want to start with an introduction to why electric vehicles are growing so significantly, especially here in the UK. It's very much a kind of electric vehicle revolution at the moment. It's a hot topic, and a lot of businesses are very aware that there are advantages for them. We'll then move on to talking a little bit about whether electric vehicles are actually suitable for your business. As I said, this is a Green Business Fund webinar, and the Green Business Fund is aimed to support SMEs. So in terms of how we approach that question, I will be addressing it from the perspective of SMEs. So on the assumption making perhaps a smaller fleet within your company. So just worth bearing in mind. Having done this, we'll then talk a little bit about kind of presenting the business case for electric vehicles. Sometimes that can be the challenge for fleet managers, engaging with the accounting team or finance team. So we'll give some examples of how you could go about doing this. And we have some case studies and examples to support that as well. And then finally, I'll give an overview of the Green Business Fund and discuss how it can help support your move to electric vehicles if this is something you want to go ahead with. So quickly, just to make sure we're all kind of on the same page when we're talking about electric vehicles, when we say EV or electric vehicles, broadly we're talking about four main categories of vehicle. We have the pure EV or battery electric vehicle, BEV. This is a vehicle where you plug it in, you charge it, and then once it's unplugged, it is wholly driven by the battery and has absolutely zero tailpipe emissions. For the plug-in hybrid EV or the PHEV, this uses, again, charging to charge an electric battery, but also has an onboard internal combustion engine that it kind of uses in harmony with the battery engine or for longer journeys to improve efficiency. There's also extended range EVs or EREVs, and in this case the drivetrain is always powered by electricity, but there is an onboard engine which is used as a generator to recharge a battery once it's depleted, giving it a few extra miles usage. And then finally there's hydrogen fuel cell vehicles which are wholly powered by hydrogen fuel cells and generate no emissions other than water. When we talk about electric vehicles within your fleet as well, we can also talk about, of course, scooters, vans, delivery vehicles, forklift trucks. Any vehicle where you charge it and it's powered on a battery is encompassed by this catch-all term electric vehicle. So just a little bit about, as I said, the market for electric vehicles is growing significantly in the UK. This chart on the right kind of shows the exponential growth since 2011 in the electric vehicle market. You see the majority of those vehicles, is the blue part of the column, is the plug-in grant eligible cars. So this has certainly helped grow the market, but really it's just because it's becoming more commercially attractive. And in terms of numbers, as of May 2019, there's over 220,000 electric vehicles now registered in the UK. And we were looking at the numbers just only 6 months ago in August, and this is a 25% increase on what it was back then. So it's expanding really quite rapidly. And then going back 5 years, there's just 3,500 vehicles registered. So it's increased, a significant multiple since then. In terms of what consumers are actually buying and using, still 2/3 of all electric vehicles purchased are still plug-in hybrids, so not pure electric vehicle, but the overall market has grown significantly. And what really is kind of behind this growth as well, you'll see from the graph here that diesel purchases and new vehicles has gone down significantly recently. That's a combination of the emissions scandal in the last couple of years, but also since the government's commitment to phase out diesel by 2040, and also that's in harmony with that, the government has also committed to further government grants with its plug-in car and charging schemes, and also obviously the manufacturers have seen this. They've seen the market trends, and so have increased their investment in the technology, and there's charging companies now providing significant infrastructure improvements and investment in charging facilities. So all of this comes together to really support the shift away from traditional fuel vehicles to alternative fuels, and in this case electric vehicles. With regards to some of the benefits of EVs, and as well as just the carbon emissions, there's also air quality. So you can see here that, and as I mentioned, the government has committed to stop the sale of new petrol and diesel vehicles in the UK by 2040. And primarily this is a response to pollution and air quality concerns. I'm doing this webinar from central London here at the moment, and recently there's a new ULEZ, an Ultra-Low Emission Zone, which has come into play from April 2019. And this is primarily around improving the air quality within the city. And the government sees shifting away from traditional fuels and bringing in more electric vehicles as a key part of achieving that. This final point at the bottom, you can also see that it's not just exclusive to London. Local authorities will be given the power to implement their own clean air zones as they wish, and there's a significant clean air fund behind that. So you may see other major cities around the UK implementing similar zones as for London ULEZ. I also just wanted to quickly touch on vehicles' role with regards to the news from only a couple of days ago that the UK is committed to be net zero by 2050. So there have been some previous pledges in place. So you see here 2015, there's a pledge to ensure almost every car and vehicle is a zero emission vehicle by 2050. That was then supported by the 2018 pledge to stop the sales of all diesel and petrol vehicles by 2040. And then, of course, just 2 days ago, the UK formally committed to being net zero by 2050, which is much more ambitious than the previous target of reducing emissions by 80% by 2050. And just to highlight transport's role in achieving this target, you can see in the graph on the left that transport is represented by the orange band, second from the left. In that 2050 row at the very bottom, it's very small, but you'll be able to see that there's no orange there at all. So by 2050, all vehicles and transport will need to be zero emission. Therefore, electric vehicles is going to be a huge part of achieving that, and the market is only going to grow. So I guess the purpose of hosting this webinar is to emphasize that, by being an early mover in this, you can start to see some of those benefits already. I'd also like to just point out that one of the big issues is always talked about when people talk about electric vehicles is the availability of charging. This map here is provided by ZapMap, who are one of the leading providers of resources to find out where you can charge your vehicle, and the number of charging points around the UK is growing significantly. There's home, there's workplace charging. A lot of companies, supermarkets, etc., are providing charging facilities on site, and the UK government has recently passed the Autonomous and Electric Vehicles Act to really help the investment in charging infrastructure, ensure that there is a consistent approach to charging across the country. And as well as businesses, or also local authorities are installing public charge points as well. So moving on to whether electric vehicles are suitable for your business. There's a few different options available. As I said, this is coming from probably a smaller fleet, maybe operating just a few company cars, maybe a couple of vans, or staff driving their own vehicles currently and claiming that mileage back. But those options are, you could offer staff an electric vehicle as a company car for personal and business travel. You may want to switch some of your diesel vans to smaller, more efficient electric vans within a commercial fleet. Or if that's maybe not suitable, you may want to have electric vehicle pool car on site for employees, which you can charge at your place of work, and then employees can use this instead of their own vehicles to make small trips throughout the day. As well as that, as I mentioned, you may also want to provide on-site charging facilities to facilitate the use of those electric vehicles. And if this is something you need to do, then there's some extra considerations around the existing infrastructure and then the increased load demand for the electricity on your site. So looking at electric vehicles as a replacement for company cars, some of these advantages may be obvious, but may not be as well. So the advantages over traditionally fueled vehicles primarily just comes down to the cost per mile, and that's where the majority of savings will be achieved. So electric vehicles have a significantly lower cost per mile, around 4p compared to 8 to 10p for a traditional fuel vehicle. And then, as well as the lower cost, there's zero tailpipe emissions, leading to contributions to higher air quality and reducing your own company's carbon footprint as well. So what sort of business practices would be well suited to using an electric vehicle? So it's due to the range restrictions. So the range on electric vehicles is increasing every month, and now the standard practice is really almost well over 250 miles range. But it's best suited to drivers that cover a high number of annual miles, so you can take advantage of those cost savings per mile, but in the region of maybe 80 to 150 miles per day. So perhaps if you have sales staff or regional staff who are traveling out to clients, traveling to distribution centers, warehouses, that kind of thing, then that is the kind of work that is best suited for an electric vehicle. This is also why I mentioned that pool cars can be very attractive financially, as they can be charged on site and then driven multiple times throughout the day by different users, but typically shorter, smaller journeys, and then return to site and then be charged up for the next user. It also is suitable if your business frequently has to travel into congestion charge zones, such as central London, so you reduce the cost to your business of having to comply with that legislation. So in terms of when you might have to think whether electric vehicles would not be suitable for your business, as I said, the primary barrier is going to be your daily journey distance, and then the availability of charging points either along that route or perhaps overnight. So that would be the key consideration when it comes to switching company cars over to electric vehicles. So this chart here just emphasizes that point on range. So this chart comes from our friends at the Energy Saving Trust, and it just gives an example of how the range on an electric vehicle changes depending on what sort of journeys are being carried out. So the pink line, for lighter color, that represents urban driving, so a driver, perhaps either a delivery driver or based in city, but not traveling at high speeds, frequent stopping and starting. And in those situations, the overall range of the vehicle is increased and more efficient for the battery. But if one of your drivers is going to have to carry out a lot of motorway driving, driving at high speeds for a consistent amount of time, then you can see this can quite significantly reduce the rated range on that vehicle as well. So that's important to consider when considering what sort of employees and which kind of company cars would be appropriate for your business. When it comes to thinking about replacing perhaps a van fleet or other commercial vehicle fleet with electric vehicles, again, the advantages are mostly around the savings on the cost per mile. And as I mentioned as well, they're especially well suited to urban driving and last mile delivery. Anyone who's been in a major city would have seen the increase in the number of primarily Nissan electric vans going around for delivery companies. And that's because, as I said, battery electric vehicles are well suited to urban driving, and also they have these exemptions from clean air zone charges as well as lower noise pollution, and so are well suited for city driving and delivery activities. So when would it not be suitable to replace a commercial vehicle with an electric vehicle? This is going to be mostly around if you, again, are covering significant rural distances, whether there's a lot of motorway driving, and that's especially relevant if your commercial vehicle is carrying, a heavy load. If there's lots of tools on board or other equipment, then this can have quite a significant impact on draining the battery as well. And we also have a chart from the Energy Saving Trust to support that as well. And you can see that in an example where the van is empty, there's no payload on board, then the range in this case is around 75 miles. But if you were to increase that payload to 700 kilograms, which is the kind of typical payload on a Nissan small delivery vehicle, then you can see the range is reduced by almost 50% to just over 40 in this case. So, as I say, availability of charging, the kind of journeys these vehicles are making, and then the load that the vehicle will be carrying are the key things to consider when thinking about switching commercial vans over to electric alternatives. So with that in mind, looking at both the company cars and switch from vans, here's just maybe a couple of questions you want to ask yourself or consider in the context of your own business. So, as I said, how many miles do staff cover per day and per year? The biggest cost savings for electric vehicles come from carrying out more miles and achieving that lower cost per mile. So as I said, if we want to ensure that drivers who cover a lot of miles but perhaps lower daily mileage are switched over to electric vehicles, whether a lease or an outright purchase would suit your business. Then also, if you plan to install charging facilities on site, then do you have adequate load capacity for that additional charging on site? That may require an additional audit or survey. You also may want to consider what electricity you're purchasing. Electric vehicles, of course, while they have zero emissions while in use, you still need to charge them, and the electricity associated with charging those vehicles and charging the battery will have emissions associated with it. But if I don't know, any company who's done kind of scope 2 reporting on their own electricity may have already considered the advantages for their business's carbon impact of switching to green tariffs. And it's the same situation when thinking about electric vehicles. If you're charging it with green or renewable electricity, then you can say that there's zero emissions associated with the vehicle. And then also, it's good just to understand what your current annual fuel bill is, including your expense mileage, just so you can understand what perhaps the scale of the cost benefit would be to your business as well. And we encourage you to do these kind of audits of your own fleets frequently anyway, even if not looking to switch to electric vehicles, just because it's good to understand how staff are using vehicles and what's important to them and how it affects your operations. So having run through kind of the suitability of different electric vehicles for your business, now I'm going to cover a little bit more on the actual financial business case for electric vehicles, as at the end of the day, we're well aware a lot of businesses need to operate sustainably when it comes to their financial situation as well as just the environment, and there needs to be an obvious cost advantage to switching to electric vehicles as well. So to do this, I'm pulling up a chart here. You can find the same chart within the guide that I mentioned earlier, if you'd like to look at it in more detail and understand some of the kind of the calculations behind it. But essentially, when talking about the financial benefits of switching over to electric vehicles, it's important to consider the whole life cycle cost of a vehicle, not just the initial purchase price, and not just the cost of running it. So I appreciate some of the numbers may be quite small, but I'll talk through the example here to demonstrate how you can go about presenting the business case for switching to electric vehicles. So in the middle column, the green heading, this is a typical small family electric car. The image we have here is the Renault Zoe, and in this situation is quite expensive. It's about £31,500 to buy this vehicle, but you will also be able to benefit from the plug-in car grant, which is provided by the government, and there is a slide coming up on the different financial incentives that are available. And in this case, we've compared it to a kind of a typical price small family diesel car. So you'll see the value of that is £23,500, so a significantly lower initial cost. But when you start looking at some of the figures and understanding what the actual in-use costs are, you can see that as you move down the table, the actual fuel cost line, so the fourth row from the bottom, over what is a 3-year period, 60,000 miles in total, the fuel cost of running the electric vehicle is significantly lower than running the small diesel car. So in this case, £3,000 versus just under £8,000. And when you also account for the servicing and maintenance costs, as well as the depreciation costs of a vehicle, then you can see here that the total, what we call in-use cost for an electric vehicle equates to 35.1 pence per mile versus 39.3 pence per mile for the diesel car. And over the course of those 60,000 miles, those 3 years, you can see that we've calculated that the total life cycle cost of owning and operating an electric car is £21,000 versus £23,500 for the diesel car. And of course, the in-use CO2 emissions as well are significantly lower from using that electric car compared to the typical diesel car. So hopefully this demonstrated that, despite perhaps a much higher vehicle cost, and that top row, you can actually see that over the course of 3 years, you'll be saving money for your business. And we'd encourage, if there's any fleet managers on the webinar here, when it comes to talking about the benefits to your business with perhaps the finance department, then it's always best to talk about the benefits of electric vehicles in whole life costing. As well as the actual in-use costs as well, there's also monetary savings available for your employees as well. For electric vehicles, which are used as company cars for private mileage, there's both lower tax and, of course, as I've already said, significantly lower fuel costs associated with running the vehicle. And this example here just compares a Ford Focus with a Nissan Lease. You can see that the tax paid on the company car is much higher for Ford Focus, and then the cost of a private fuel over the vehicle's life to the employee is significantly higher when using diesel. So you can use these kind of examples as well to demonstrate that, as well as advantages to your business, there's also financial advantages to your employees as well, as they benefit from lower tax and, of course, lower fuel costs as well when they use it for their own private mileage. I mentioned that there was a £3,500 plug-in grant available as well. So I'm just going to quickly run through some of the other incentives that have been provided by the government to encourage the use of EVs and charging equipment. So the first one here is the workplace charging scheme. This is a grant funding up to 75% of the cost of a single workplace charging station So if you are installing multiple charging stations, you can claim a grant of up to 75% of the cost of each of those different charging stations. And this is to encourage more businesses to install these facilities on site. As well as the charging, there's then the plug-in grant scheme, and this is again a grant for electric vehicles that costs less than £60,000, offering up to 35% of the vehicle's cost, up to a maximum of £2,500 for hybrid, or up to £4,500 for a full electric vehicle. The scheme was topped up with additional funding in November and is due to run until at least 2020. And this cost is off the price of a new vehicle, and also it is the dealership or the retailer of the vehicle who reclaims this money as well. So that you, as a buyer, don't need to go through the process of claiming this grant when you purchase a vehicle. It's just taken off the cost. As well as workplace charging, the government also want to encourage more home charging as well. And so there's a similar grant available, a grant of up to 75%, up to £500 off the cost of installing a domestic charge point at home. And then, as we already mentioned, there's also tax benefits to operating an electric vehicle. So you see vehicles under £40,000 are exempt from vehicle exercise duty, and as we've already mentioned, most electric vehicles are also exempt from congestion charges and clean air zone charges as well. So breaking it down into, I guess, overall, drivers and barriers to your business when it comes to switching over to electric vehicles, in terms of what the advantages are, what the drivers are. As I said, there's significantly lower carbon emissions from your fleet, so this will impact your own company's carbon footprint. It mitigates future risk from clean air zones or other air quality regulation. I know, speaking to some of our clients here, when they introduced the ULEZ in London, there's a lot of operators of less efficient commercial vehicles who are suddenly hit with significant extra charges. It's really challenged the profitability of their business. So by moving early and investing in electric vehicles and electric vehicle technology early, you can avoid some of that future risk if other cities or other regulation comes into play to charge for using traditional fuel vehicles in urban environments. One thing we also haven't really mentioned so far is that batteries engines typically have fewer moving parts, and there's no oil or filters required. So the actual maintenance costs of owning and operating an electric vehicle are typically much lower, as there's kind of fewer things that can go wrong, and this is reflected in lower service and maintenance cost per mile. There's also lower noise pollution, and it's actually typically a better driving experience for the driver as well, due to the smoother kind of acceleration and lower noise as well. And then finally, it's also important to consider the volatility of fuel prices, so it reduces your business's reliance on imported fuel prices, and means that the price of your fuel is more closely tied to the grid electricity cost. In terms of barriers, as I said, if you do want to install on-site charging, this may require additional load management to ensure that there is sufficient energy supply on site to handle charging multiple vehicles. And also you may need some driver training to ensure that staff know how to utilize vehicles optimally and won't find themselves caught out by charging requirements or a lack of charging facilities. And then also, of course, there's always a challenge for businesses. Staff may push back to the suggestion of operational changes as well, and switching from what they know to perhaps newer technology. So there needs to be a good level of conversation between yourself and the drivers who will be using these vehicles as well, to make sure people understand why business is switching over to these and what the advantages are to themselves. So I just wanted to pull up this slide as well, because this adds some kind of real world examples to some of those points I was just going through there. So in, I believe it was February or January this year, the EV100 report was launched. This is a report on the EV100 commitment, which is a program operated by the Climate Group, where businesses can sign up and commit to fully electrifying their fleet or commit to providing charging facilities for both customers and staff, with the hope to ensure that 100% of their fleet is electrified by 2030. And so the Carbon Trust role were kind of technical experts for this review as well. And when doing this, we kind of reached out to the members who had committed to achieving these goals by 2030 to understand for real businesses what are their top 5 drivers and what are the top 5 barriers. So just running through some of these stats that we got from this, you can see that for businesses, the top 5 drivers for going electric, the number one is to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions, especially that's especially relevant with the latest news coming from the government only 2 days ago. Companies need to understand what they can do to help the UK achieve its goals and reduce their own carbon emission impacts, and electric vehicles are seen as a key part of that. The second driver was also to lead the transition to electric transport. A lot of these companies want to be ahead of the curve. They want to be seen as leaders in the field. So being first mover is a real incentive for a lot of businesses. There's also reputational benefits that come from a company being seen to have a lot of electric vehicles. Then fourth on the list is reducing local air pollution. And then a bit further down, but still within the top 5 drivers, is then the potential for financial savings to the business as well. Moving on to the chart on the right, just looking at kind of what these companies see as the top 5 barriers to them going fully electric at the moment. Number one, top of the list, it may not be a surprise, is actually the lack of charging infrastructure. So a lot of these businesses need to make sure that they're able to charge their vehicles so they can still carry out their business effectively. Second is the capital cost of EVs, seen as a large barrier to going fully electric. Then third is an immature EV product offering in target markets. A lot of these companies that sign up for Skimming are operating significant commercial fleets, so some of the technology may not be quite ready for that kind of business, so that's seen as a barrier here. Then fourth barrier is employee and customer anxiety of new technology, and then the fifth barrier is lack of grid capacity for charging. So we thought it would be interesting just to add this, just so you can kind of get a real world example of what companies are saying and what companies are thinking, and just to give an example of some of the organizations that have committed to this EV100 port. There's people like ULEZ, IKEA, Heathrow Airport, a number, DHL, some operators of quite significant fleets in there. So with that in mind, and again, just to kind of emphasize the business case for switching to electric vehicles, I'm just going to provide a couple of case studies from which are publicly available, of examples of where companies have successfully introduced their fleets. So the first is Nottingham City Council. Obviously, as a public body, operational cost and efficiency is incredibly important consideration for them. And they switched to electric vehicles and have become a Go Ultra-Low company in June 2016, and currently operating 25 plug-in vehicles within the fleet. You can see here in the pictures here, they have, I believe that's a Nissan Leaf and then a Nissan ENV 200 van, which I mentioned earlier as well. And off the back of this, they're planning to upgrade to 80 plug-in vehicles by 2020. In terms of what cost savings they've seen, they've seen 70% cost savings on their van fleet since switching over, and have been operating EVs in fleet for 7 years now, starting with just 2 vehicles in 2010. So for them, the incentive really is that cost saving, but they also want to kind of increase the life cycle of their vehicles, and have also cited that the lower service, maintenance, and repair costs associated with electric vehicles is much lower as well, so they can actually keep these vehicles in their fleet for longer and achieve larger savings. This next case study is from DHL, so one of those EV100 members. So DHL have actually invested and I believe purchased a manufacturing facility to create their own electric delivery vans. So pictured here is the street scooter, and this is used primarily for, as I said, urban driving, that last mile delivery. And these are fully electric vans, and just some of the figures that they've pulled out as being an advantage to them. So they've seen 60 to 70% savings on their fuel costs, and also 60 to 80% savings on their maintenance and repair costs. So it's kind of emphasizing some of the messages that I've already said today, but businesses are already seeing significant fuel and maintenance savings from implementing electric vehicles into their fleet. And then, so just some other examples of where companies have started to commit to switching over to fully electric. Tesco and National or Network Rail have committed to fully electrify their van fleets. This covers 18,000 vehicles in total, and really is just a testament to the business case for switching to electric vehicles. And as I said, if you're interested in other commitments companies are making, you can view other commitments at the EV100 website as well. So I appreciate there's been quite a lot of information to take in. We've kind of covered a lot of topics around the advantages and some things to consider around switching from traditional fuel vehicles to electric vehicles. I'm going to now just talk a little bit about how the Green Business Fund can support your business, but if there's additional information or additional questions you do have around anything to do with electric vehicles, then please, I'd encourage you to add it to the current list of questions we have, and we will get around to addressing those shortly. But before we do that, I'll just cover off how the Green Business Fund can help your business. So just quickly a little bit about the Green Business Fund. This is a program that the Carbon Trust has operated since 2016, I believe, and the services available are in England, Scotland and Wales, and essentially it's a fund that provides free services to SMEs within this geography to help them become more energy efficient. So by SME, so who would qualify? It's businesses which meet any two of these criteria. So a company which has either no more than 250 employees, an annual turnover lower than 25.9 million, or an annual balance sheet not in excess of 12.9 million. And then importantly, also it cannot be owned by an entity which would not qualify for the service as well. So the scheme is really aimed at targeting the SME sector within the UK, who perhaps typically may not benefit from some of the other benefits that large companies get. So in terms of what you, if you qualify, what you're able to apply for as our funded services. The first of this, we have workshops around energy efficiency training. These are 2-hour workshops that are hosted all over the country. These are hosted by the Carbon Trust and typically a local authority partner. And these are just delivered to kind of help you understand energy consumption within your business and identify some low and no cost measures that you could kind of implement today or in the near future to see some immediate energy efficiency changes. Some upcoming workshops, should you wish to sign up for these, we've got one at the end of June in Milton Keynes, in the northeast Newcastle, 12th of September, and then southwest in Bristol on the 17th of September. So if you would be interested in attending one of these, you can sign up for these on the Green Business Fund website. As well as the workshops, we also provide opportunity assessments. So these are either remote or on-site audits, which are carried out by one of our engineers. They'll review your current business practices, your current equipment, and use that process to identify free energy saving recommendations, and we'll kind of give you a tailored report and tailored appraisal of your own energy management to help you identify opportunities to improve your energy efficiency. And then following that, they're also able to give you implementation advice on building a business case, maybe reaching out to suppliers, choosing the best option available to your business to actually go ahead and implement some of the measures that are identified through the opportunity assessments. You may also note that this is aimed at what are called non-large companies. So even companies with up to 1,000 employees may apply for the implementation advice service as well, but that's the only one of the services which is available to larger companies. We also offer technical webinars and publications through the Green Business Fund. Obviously, this is one of the webinars currently, and I've highlighted that there is an electric vehicle publication available as well. But as well as talking about electric vehicles, these webinars and publications cover a huge range of different energy efficiency considerations. So I'd encourage you to take a look at some other webinars we're running, and also look at what other publications are available to download online, as a lot of these could help your business save energy and reduce your energy costs as well. And then finally, we also have a number of tools, online energy saving tools that are available to SMEs, to give you to help you along those first steps of starting to measure and reduce your carbon emissions. These are available and accessible online, and we have tools to help you measure your carbon footprint. A very simple: enter your energy consumption and we'll tell you what your carbon footprint is. We can give you a tool to benchmark your energy use against peers or other similar businesses, so you can understand whether you're ahead or behind the curve. And also we have a tool to help build a business case for upgrading lighting. Typically LED lighting is a very quick win, so that tool has proved to be very useful in building a business case for that. So in terms of how Green Business Fund can help with your switch over to electric vehicles, the cost associated with switching to electric vehicles isn't covered by the Green Business Fund, but we do also operate a supplier scheme called the Green Business Directory, and this does include the suppliers of electric vehicle charging points. So if you're looking for a reputable supplier of charging points, then we'd encourage you to visit our Green Business Directory, as you'll be able to find some here who will be able to help you with going ahead and installing charging points. So just in conclusion, just before we start the Q&A portion of the webinar, I encourage you to go ahead and download the electric vehicle guide that I mentioned earlier. The link should be clickable when you receive these slides, so you can follow that to do that. I know hopefully webinars explained why the electric vehicles are growing so significantly in the UK, and what the business benefits are when it comes to switching from either company cars to electric vehicles or switching over vans to electric vehicle alternatives, and also given some consideration to the costs involved and what the cost benefits are. And also they've added some extra questions maybe you might need to ask yourself as to whether your business is well suited to electric vehicles. As I said, please, any additional questions, send them through. We'll get to addressing those in just a couple of moments. And if you have any further questions after the webinar, then please get in touch with the Carbon Trust on the number there. As I said, we've received a lot of questions already, so I'll just take a minute just to read a couple of these, and we'll be back to answer those very shortly. Thank you. Okay, great. So I've had a chance to look through some of the questions. We've received a lot of questions and comments, so we'll do our best to get through these in the next 15 minutes or so. But the first question I'd like to address is just a question on whether the grants are available in Northern Ireland. So I believe that the government grants will be available in Northern Ireland, but any support from the GBF is just provided just to England, Scotland and Wales. Unfortunately, Northern Ireland is not included in that. So the next question we have is a comment on what kilowatt hour unit of electricity, what cost per unit of electricity has been considered when carrying out these per mile cost calculations for low emission vehicles. And that is a good point, as obviously electricity price does vary. If you're choosing to purchase green electricity, it may be more expensive than other electricity, and also a lot of suppliers also vary their tariffs depending on when you charge. So we've just used kind of a standard UK average pence per kilowatt hour. But as I mentioned, if you choose to have an electric vehicle and either charge vehicles on site or at home overnight, then some suppliers of electricity will actually give you a cheaper tariff for using that electricity overnight, as where there's lower demand. So you can, although costs can vary quite significantly, there are actually, you can get quite cost-effective tariffs from suppliers for charging vehicles. And also on that, when considering electricity consumption of your fleet, you also don't want to double count the emissions and energy consumption associated with using electric vehicles with the electricity consumed by your own site. So whereas business travel and business fuel is often separate from building consumption, if you are charging vehicles on site, then you'll need to be aware that the electricity may be included in your vehicle consumption, so you just shouldn't double count that. There's also a question on whether the lack of charging infrastructure is a barrier to EVs, and whether businesses can overcome that. So as I mentioned, it certainly is it's perceived as a key barrier. There is a lot of companies who are installing charging at the moment. As I've said, the government has committed to ensuring that all petrol stations have EV charging facilities available, and also that the charging points are standardized, so you can be able to park up and use these anywhere. We're actually working with a number of companies at the moment who provide charging services to help them understand which regions need most chargers, what the load capacity would like for certain sites. So while I'd say it's certainly perceived as being a challenge, the reality is that a lot of electric vehicle cars now have very significant ranges, over 250 miles, and so the chances of being unable to reach a charging point is a bit of a myth at the moment, and really is only a concern if you are carrying out a lot of motorway driving in rural areas. One question on whether there's EV tractors available. I must admit, off the top of my head, I don't know the answer to that. I would certainly think there is the technology available. We're seeing fully electric heavy goods vehicles, so lorries and that kind of vehicles. So there certainly is the power available there, but that's not an area I specialize in, so I don't know off the top of my head, but I would encourage you to look into that. Question on the plug-in grant, whether anyone can apply for a £3,500 plug-in grant, whether it's applied at the point of purchase or do I need to apply. So if you are purchasing a new vehicle, this grant is taken off the price of purchase, so it's on the dealership to apply for and receive the grant. So as the buyer, there's no need for you to apply for that, which also means that you won't be able to apply for that retrospectively if you already have electric vehicles within the fleet. Just looking at some of these other questions that have come through. So there's a point on the fluctuating price of fossil fuels and whether this is a similar concern for electricity costs. Certainly in the UK, there's much less reliance on importing of electricity, so there's less risk in terms of price fluctuations. But that can be seen in diesel and petrol prices from factors well outside of UK's control. The UK supply is much more constant and is very heavily regulated. So in general, we'd expect price fluctuations to be much less obvious. And as I mentioned earlier, you can get actually price advantages from your suppliers and perhaps more competitive tariffs if you charge overnight and that kind of thing. Question on whether you think electric ambulances and fire trucks will ever be viable with the equipment on board. In the case of whether they'll ever be viable, I think certainly they will be. Kind of reaching these 2050 goals, I reckon back to a period of time, there'll definitely be the technology to have those vehicles fully electrified, though at the moment it's not practical. I work personally with a number of airports at the moment, and while they've managed to electrify all those small baggage handling vehicles and the vehicles which take the stairs to the planes, there's no consideration of switching over their health and safety vehicles to electric vehicles at the moment, just for, as you mentioned, the risk is too great at the moment and the technology isn't there. But certainly in the future, I would imagine those vehicles will be fully electric as well. One question on again on kind of heavy goods vehicles and whether there's hybrid vans for tipper trucks or construction vehicles. There are hybrids in the kind of heavy industry and heavy plant market. A lot of efficiencies. There are hybrid motors which can be charged on site, but also there's kind of fuel replacement. We're seeing kind of either dual fuel or switching to synthetic fuels or biofuels as opposed to traditional diesel, and that's where some further carbon reductions can be achieved. But construction sites can benefit quite often from electric vehicles. I mentioned electric forklift trucks and other generators can make electric vehicles quite viable for ground equipment. So I don't think we have a couple of extra comments, but unless I've covered everyone, any other questions that I can address? So actually one question on how green electric vehicles really are, going back to the electricity that is used to charge these, and obviously the UK grid is still supplied by gas. It's weaning off coal, but certainly there's going to be a lot of gas, and gas is kind of seen as one of the long-term goals. Yes, ultimately that does determine how green the electric vehicle is. If I refer back to the earlier slide on the kind of per mile emissions, even just using the average UK grid, the emissions per mile is still much lower than using a typical diesel engine, even if you count for the mixed grid. But also, as I mentioned, if you really are looking to ensure your business has the most robust environmental credentials, then you probably want to look into purchasing renewable energies or green tariffs from your suppliers, and having that backed up by REGOs and other certificates of authenticity, which means you can then report that electricity as being zero emissions, and then your fleet as being zero emissions. Okay, brilliant. Well, it looks like there are no further questions coming in. So I'd like to thank everyone this morning for joining this webinar. I hope it's been informative and useful. And as I mentioned, there's further resources available, and you can get in touch with either myself or my colleagues at the Carbon Trust as well if you'd like to receive some more information. So please enjoy the rest of your day, and thank you very much.